Maybe we'll do it in a round. If you got a website, you need a system to manage your content through Drupal. Anyway, if you want to build a web application, you've got to download Drupal. Usually that quiets people down faster, but maybe my singing's getting better. No? Well, then you make people quiet down faster. So. All right. I just flew in from Chicago. Boy, are my arms tired. I'm original. That's an open source show. You made that up. Yeah. I'll take credit. All right. Thank you everyone for coming. First Tuesday of the month, meetup. For those of you who are new, welcome. We switch between formats every month. Lightning talks on the odd months. Drupal night presentations on the even months, which is tonight. We have a speaker. Please join us every month. Oh, I don't have my other slide. Bathrooms are behind there. You found food, you found the drinks. So we're going to have a featured speaker tonight, and then after that, I have some announcements about the Drupal group, about local events, etc. So please stick around. With that, we have Dan speaking on, did I keep the right title, Practical Tips for Drupal 8 Site Building? Mm-hmm. Yes, right title.
And career stuff too.
And career stuff too.
Good mixture.
Good mixture. From after a brief intro from BioRaft, then Dan is going to present. So, without further fanfare.
Are you recording it? You're good.
What are you?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Eric Byrant. I'm a senior software engineer at BioRaft. Welcome to Drupal Night, sponsored by BioRaft. Tonight, we're very, very lucky to have Dan here presenting. Dan has been a member of the Drupal community for over 12 years and has lots of contributions, not only to Drupal, but other open source projects. And we're really fortunate that he agreed to come and speak tonight. So, big round of applause to Dan, please.
Let's get my computer plugged in before we get started. All right. So I was curious because I've had a lot of different roles and different sort of technical things I've done and different ways I've applied Drupal. So I was sort of curious, like, how many people here are, like, would you say you're in like an agency, like a creative agency, ad agency, things of that nature? All right. How many of you would say you're students? Students? All right. How about like you work in a department like higher ed or the government, or you're sort of like part of a larger general organization, I guess. All right. What are some other, I guess, like, how many people do you have here working like a startup by chance? Like something that's like a startup? All right. And I know that there's a few people that work in a worker cooperative that are here. The Agaric crowd. So over there. So is there any like kind of categories I missed? Like I'd be curious if you want to like shout them out. Like I'm just trying to like think about the overall picture. Yes. All right. What's that? Contracting? Contractors? Yeah. All right. So I've done a lot of different roles like that. And so what I wanted to do today was towards the end of the talk, I'll get into some Drupal 8 sites that I worked on recently. But also I wanted to talk about being like a solo consultant, being a contractor, working at a startup, working as a sort of journalist / web developer / web editor type of person, because there's a lot of different things you can do with Drupal, and I think it's pretty interesting. Could I actually ask if someone can bring me a stool, because it'll help my like air kind of. I'm a tall person, so I'm gonna run a little low on air. Sorry. Thank you. I meant to ask earlier. All right. So, if this computer can stay awake, that would be nice. I learned how to use Impress.js this weekend. That was great. So ever since I was little, the University of Minnesota did something to my brain. And I learned how to use like a Mac 512. I was always really interested in that. Like making VHS video and stuff. So I was always interested in computers, and this thing is solidified. Come on. All right. So when I was in high school, I was always very interested in the things you could do, like using Apache and stuff like that. I started to look at that type of thing. Apache for Dummies was a very influential book in my life. And so I got Linux working on a PowerMac 6100 with a special kernel, and I started running a website off our cable modem. And I used this program called News Pro to generate a blog. Before it was even called a blog. This is like circa 1999, 2000, around then. Then I used PHP Nuke, MediaWiki, Scoop, Movable Type, things like that. And then I switched to WordPress when Movable Type went kind of proprietary. And I lost some of my data, but a lot of stuff got on archive.org. So I was interested in computer science, but I ended up majoring in political science and minoring in geography. Because computer science curriculum was really designed by kind of math professors. And so it wasn't exactly like web development.
Sorry.
Yeah,
it's a representative of the math professors.
Oh, it's okay. It's just it's not the same as web development, though. That was the case where I was, at least at the time. So I graduated in 05, and so all along I wanted to find something about making multiple pieces of content with different types of fields that wasn't proprietary. And so I learned first phase kind of about learning for Drupal for journalism and political organizing. So I wanted to see what ways you could affect the news by doing independent publishing, and I wanted to see, and I ended up seeing that you could actually get really pretty far with limited resources, and I think that's actually really cool. And that's something that Drupal's had a huge impact on my life, all the way back to this period. And so my first project, Civic CRM, site building and data entry, and circa March 2006. Minnesota politics will have these days where everything is reshuffled because people try to run for other things. It's actually happening today, so it's funny I'm giving the talk today, because the reason I learned Drupal was because someone wanted to run for office, and someone else was moving up, running out for office, and they needed to have use Civic CRM to manage their delegates. So this guy, John David Schlow, who was later Al Franken's campaign director, he introduced me to Drupal. He's like, this is cool, this can really do this stuff. And so Drupal, Civic CRM and Drupal 4.x, they were trying to get on the county board in Hennepin County. And so Civic CRM was and is an effective instrument for tracking lots of constituents, mapping interactions with them, phone and email, stuff like that. It was helpful in the delegate battle and tracking people in the county convention. Spawned from Dean Space, which was used by the Howard Dean supporters in 2004, and I was kind of like a netroots sort of person, so this all sounded really good to me at this point. So Drupal 5 is released in January of 07. I was working at a news service called Politics in Minnesota, which released insider news and a directory every 2 years. We had a hideous ASP website, and I had two bosses on opposite sides of the political spectrum who weren't getting along. And so only one of them liked me. So one day they were like getting kind of paranoid about the other political partner, the other business partner. They're like, okay, Dan, map out like where's the domains registered and the mailing list and the hosting. So I like made it sort of a chart of where everything is. And so one day they said, like, we don't want to work together. So that other web guy went home and started kicking us off of everything. And so they're like, get down here, Dan, we got kicked off. And so I go down to the office and ensues the hacker battle royale, which I'll tell you, in a situation like this is pretty cool. Because it's like, he was trying to kick us off the mailing list, and I had to socially engineer constant contact to put us back on the mailing list, all that kind of tactics that you might have thought. And by the end of this like 4-hour period, I'd locked him out of everything I totally wanted. It was great. And so it turns out if you never sign your legal partnership papers, possession's 9/10 of the law. Who knew? So that was Friday. On Saturday and Sunday, I built a Drupal 5 website on Bartik. And then on Monday, we were back up with hardly a blip. Nobody even noticed. And so that became eventually, this thing is just deteriorating so badly. Anyway, that was Politics in Minnesota, and it was like running Drupal 5. And we had like some views going on, different content types, pretty complicated menu structure. We just kind of kept adding onto it side by side, and it kind of kept growing. So we were able to use Open Ads or OpenX to sell ad revenue, build up multiple content types, build up legislative district profiles, node references, political candidates, stuff like that. So as long as we could, oh, that's good.
I also do IT.
Thank you. Yes. So basically, my publisher, the late Sarah Janicek, basically said, if we could kind of corner different areas of the political world using like online publishing and stuff, we could just basically kind of go forth and do it. So we had Drupal had really strong SEO, like long tail stuff with taxonomies, and then I built like a nice. That's great. Thanks.
There we go.
I don't know. Yeah, it's wild. It's
All right.
like.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on there.
It's mysterious. Yeah. Anyways, so I built a Twitter aggregator with Yahoo Pipes. An events calendar was very successful. And then we got bought by a newspaper conglomerate that took everything into Chapter 11, and it all fell apart. But so I learned a lot of different things there. But I definitely learned that like with Drupal, you can go really far with things. You can do a lot of publishing. It's really very cool. And so then, besides that, sort of around that era, I was also with a group called Twin Cities Indie Media, which is part of the Independent Media Center Network, which started after the 1999 WTO protests. And exactly a decade ago, several McAllister students and graduates, including myself, worked really hard night after night to build a Drupal 5 platform to roll out before the 2008, this is crazy, Republican National Convention.
It could be your resolution.
Oh yeah, it could be.
Could be the topic.
Oh yeah, man. Oh, we're just getting started. All right, come on. All right. So anyway, we were trying to build a clearinghouse for like the kind of like the radical news. We wanted to like really find a way for people to. What do you think it is? I don't even see a resolution option.
Maybe it's scale.
Scale.
Yeah. No, you're on the right tab. Below the radio button says scale.
Oh yeah. Okay. 720. Let's try that. Thank you. Let's go. All right. I spent a lot of time worrying about video resolution, so I can relate to this situation. All right. Okay. All right. We have other dongles, but I don't want to mess with them. So anyway, so Indie Media, it's a volunteer platform. It was wildly successful at the time of this RNC thing. It was my idea to have kind of a live wire bulletin that would like quickly send things out, sort of say this is our credibility ratings and stuff like that, of like news, breaking details going on. So we produced like stories and videos for years. In terms of security, one time we got spammed with like international spam, like they penetrated the featured stories like taxonomy filter system, which was supposed to be access controlled. And then when I looked at the module, I figured it out. The form API would set the JavaScript state of the thing to be disabled, but it wouldn't prevent it from accepting submissions, right? So it was like the value could still be set in a submission. So all you had to do is kind of hack that JavaScript or whatever. So I figured that out, submitted it, got the patch in. So that was pretty good because that was the first like security patch thing that I had found. After an incident, I figured out what the problem was and got it fixed. So I learned a lot about varnish cache. And I learned that even with like very little resources, you can really queue like whole communities, activists and organizer communities about subjects like bad legislation and what the police are doing, the local politicians, you can distribute videos. And also the calendar was very successful, and I think people still really need independent non-Facebook calendars at this point in time right now. And that was something that we didn't expect to have a huge impact on our community, but it really did. So that I thought was important. And then from this, I did a Drupal distribution because I wanted to see other people build similar websites. So I built up kind of a simple distribution. It didn't have the complicated features of a lot of distributions, but at least set up the modules for you and kind of gave you an approach to use. And then that, I think, inspired a bunch of people, and Chicago Indie Media still operates this way today. So that's, all right, so then let's move into section 2, which is being Minneapolis independent consulting, contractor, startup / agency web developer, a bunch of different things. So basically, in July 2009, I started Feidt Design LLC, 1099, communication consultancy, mostly paid my bills this way. The day that I registered the company, the White House had this glitch where it was like, welcome to your new Drupal site on whitehouse.gov. And I was like, very auspicious. So I thought that was a good sign. So things I felt I was good at from the beginning, overall, site building, CCK, image fields, theme pages. I felt very comfortable with BlueHost as a dev environment. It runs CentOS, which is a type of like Red Hat. And I was pretty good with Drush. I felt like I could fix Drupal sites, I could do troubleshooting. I could make sites that were pretty reliable and wouldn't screw up if they were maintained. I felt pretty good about that. Not so good at invoicing and bookkeeping at the beginning. Invoicing procrastination is a killer, right? So if you're not the kind of person who likes like sending people bills for money, then it's not good. So eventually I got, FreshBooks, there's a lot of vendors that, out there, but for me, FreshBooks helped me get through that. Checking voicemail, I'm still averse to voicemail. I missed a gig one time that way, that was too bad. So I never looked at the code inside modules usually. I just felt like it was sort of beyond me, and so I ignored it. And sometimes I wouldn't procrastinate or communicate enough, you just kind of when you're working independently, you just don't want to talk to anybody. It's like February, it's snowing, you don't want to talk to anyone, So that type of thing. It's important when you're over the long run to kind of poke your head out of that sort of. And I think that's one thing that, things like monthly groups can really help a lot with. So it's important to know, if you're into 1099, if you haven't done this before, you need to make your quarterly estimated payments or you will get smashed. A credit union can save you a lot of fees. If you find a good credit union, then you're only paying $5 a month for anything. Sometimes if things are slow, staffing agencies can help a lot. I got a bunch of different gigs with Robert Half because people that need someone to come in and do their website stuff don't necessarily feel comfortable interpreting resumes that just come in, and so the staffing agency is like a vouch for you, basically. Robert Half in particular has kind of cheesy time tests about HTML that weren't accurate, the kind of stuff you can Google on Stack Overflow. That was kind of the silliest thing about them. But other than that, they were pretty good, I thought. And it's like if you're tired for fishing for projects, the staffing agency can be helpful, can kind of get you moving. So there are positives to that. The other thing that's important to know is that when you get into this, you can actually understand more of the code in the modules than you might realize. If you challenge yourself to read the stuff a little, you're like, oh, I thought it was unknowable. It's not. That's good news, I wish I'd known that earlier. So as a contractor, it's good for getting new contracts, permanent positions sometimes, sort of try before you buy. Pretty decent pay rates. It'll get you in the door. Regular resume won't. I do recommend that you should give an extra little SMS contact info out to whoever you're working with in the field in case you get super sick and you don't check email for a few days after you turn your work in. I felt bad about that because I did a good project, but I forgot to check off 2 checkboxes and features, and I got super sick and I was wiped out, and I didn't check my email, and they'd emailed me oh, what did you say? And they got their guy to fill it in, but I felt bad about that. I was I could have avoided that. I could have dragged that one little bit out if I had just SMS specifically. So working as an agency web developer, this is something I learned the hard way, is that if you get stuck for more than a week, you can lose your job with a little warning. And a solo client may be more tolerant. They'll just be oh, okay, whatever. But if you're not communicating right, you can suddenly lose your job. Also, I'm a night owl, I would say. And I think it's easier to be a night owl as a solo consultant than in a design team, because the business world is controlled by the morning people. The morning people want to be up in the morning. And so I'd rather be 2 a.m., yeah, the internet's fast, and this is cool, and nobody needs the website to work right now. This is great. So it's a way more relaxing period of time to fuss the website. Am I right? Yeah, we did off hours. Yeah. So let's fight for the night owls, man. So my first hefty kind of consulting project was this YouTube uploader. It's obsolete, but it is on GitHub now. I have to put it on GitLab now, I guess, right? So this guy Noah Kunin asked me to make a module that could upload videos from random people up to a YouTube channel, and so I used the Zend GData framework, which got tokens from Google, put them into the forms. The form fields. It had to have metadata on the form, and then the submissions would go up to a Google endpoint. And so my lesson was that I could do this successfully, pretty quickly, about a week and change. Full time I got it done, and I felt really good about it. So So that was great. Let's shrink it down a little. Come on. One more. There we go. All right, 2010 U.S. Social Forum in Detroit. It was a small example of how I was looking forward to like doing little bits of Drupal work here and there, kind of like a roaming sort of mercenary, I guess. So I went out, the Social Forum is this kind of leftist response to the World Economic Forum in Davos. And so I met in Detroit, and I stayed with these techies in this like little tech house apartment. A lot of people have May 1st people link. Have anybody ever heard of them? Yeah, you guys would know. Yeah, they're kind of like one of the rad ISPs from the 90s that have been there the whole time. So like, they were the ones that have actually been hosting stuff and not been, like Rackspace, And so so the conference distribution was this Drupal distro. Do you remember the name of the Drupal distribution that does conferences?
COD.
COD, C-O-D?
Yes. Conference Organizing Distribution.
Conference Organizing Distribution. So it was pumping through a ton of people, and it was really slow, and it was because the views were these giant views that had no caching turned on. And I was like, all right, I know what to do here. Let's fix the caching. And I did, and it sped right up. And they were like, yeah, man. So then I had some cred with these super genius people. And I got to be friends with, Ben Malencone. I forgot to bring in any t-shirts, and he gave me a t-shirt that I still have to this day. It was a great example of Drupal-powered people's conference. It was cool troubleshooting. I felt like I got to know a bunch of people, so it was a very positive experience. So when I was back in the city, I would try to build a website for kind of a magazine that does online agriculture. It's like, if you want to know how to turn your lawnmower into a flamethrower or build like a hydroponic, tilapia thing out of PVC pipes, these guys are very good at that. And instead of sticking with my BlueHost method, people in Minneapolis were like, you should really try to use our hosting to do this. And I tried to do that, and it didn't work for me, and it slowed me down. And I was like, okay, I gotta switch it back. So I switched it back, and then I was feeling my communication was kind of slipping. And then I didn't have a laptop at that time, so I always had to be home to work. And my roommate got super sick. I'll spare you the details, but I couldn't get away. It was really, really bad for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. So the client canceled the project, and they had this kind of appealing alternative pitch of someone who had worked in the field. They're like, come on, I can do this, man, I know how to do it. And I learned later that person never panned out. They did a horrible job. And so if I had been just a little bit more responsible in how I arranged it and created like a milestone where I would deploy a simpler element to the site, I could have hit the milestone and kept on moving. So that's a lesson where if you're going solo, if you can find a way to hit a milestone and set one up, then you'll like create kind of a base camp for yourself climbing the mountain. And I think if I had done that, I would have probably been able to save the project. And those guys were really cool though. So that was it was a learning experience. I think every time something doesn't go right, you should try to, like I'm trying to do here, pull out like, what are the big lessons here? How can you move on? So then I worked at a startup. At my college reunion, my friend's husband talked me into joining the startup. And it was called Swappies. It was a full-out effort to make a social network for musicians to create music tracks together. We had it on Drupal 6, because Drupal 7 kind of slow with views, and you can remember when Drupal 7 launched, it took a while. So we did Drupal 6, it worked pretty well. The beta testers liked it. We kind of got bogged down, it's hard to decide what the user interface should be. I'd say, in retrospect, stick with one design, again, and try to hit your milestones. We run out of money because nobody gives money to startups in Minnesota. It just doesn't happen. It was fun to work there, but it put me in a huge financial hole. And so when it shut down, a bunch of the other developers, they joined together to create their own shop called Origin 8, which has been pretty successful. Seth runs it now, and Paul worked there before. They're great guys. I definitely recommend Origin 8. They ended up later working with University of Minnesota as a vendor, a good example of how an ecosystem of consulting can kind of happen. So it also started my interest in organic groups, which I do think is still a really powerful idea and good for self-organizing. So our whole thing was built on organic groups. So 2011 DrupalCon Chicago. Was anybody there? 2011? Yeah? All right. So that was when it was my first national convention. I first submitted a patch. I gave OG Statistics a readme because it had no documentation, but it was a good statistics module for organic groups. I also attended the 2012 Denver and Baltimore 2017 cons. I went to Design for Drupal. I'm going back again. That's later this month, by the way. Should be good. The sessions are up, Leslie told me. That's awesome. Went to Iowa Drupal Corn, which is very aptly named. That was cool. So I'm really averse to organizing events. I don't like to host parties and stuff. So I really appreciate all the work everybody does for those things. Also, somebody caught it earlier tonight that they have this same shirt, and it was I can show you, it was a Denver shirt. So I have a lot of I always try to collect as many shirts as I can. So you grab the shirts early at the convention, just circle around, that's the big tip. So Occupy Wall Street 2011 NYC, I just bring this up because it happened like a little while after Swap Eats had shut down, so I had time. I was part of the original group of live streaming and media people, and it was kind of sort of an open source political movement, and it was trying to apply a lot of different kinds of software. And then the second morning I was there, who do I see but Ben with his green Celtics jacket? I'm like, oh my God, dude, you're here. He's like, oh my God, you're here. And then he hooked us up with we got 30 people to cycle through his shower at the Millennium Hotel and stuff. It was great. So, so that's a photo of that time. And we were trying to, I think find ways to do things apply these software to changing the political system and adding pressure on things and stuff like that. A little bit of history here is that the Tech Ops working group had kind of Drupal and WordPress factions going on. So the WordPress guys set up BuddyPress, and the Drupal people were trying to come up with a kind of sophisticated organic groups thing. So somebody who had a desk at Lullabot, we all went up. Lullabot has this office that's way above the golden, bull in Wall Street, and we all went out on the balcony. It was a really good night. It seemed like the world had a lot of possibilities. For once, we had the powers that be on the run. We had kind of rolled free software into all this. It was all sort of coming together. So I just remember that, and the fact that Lullabot as a Drupal place was just part of that moment. It also sort of tied together, I guess. So, so I worked at a creative firm in Minneapolis, which had its own multi-site kind of production instance and kind of cloud host that offered nonprofits. It's kind of a standardized approach. Had fused feature module, content types, standardized manual to give the clients, do core updates that way, had interesting connections around town. This good local dev environment, a good local box to do your work on. My coworker is really good at Bash. Figured out how to do multi-sites really effectively. And we used a wiki to track our projects. I worked with Les Lim and Chris Dart. They're both really terrific people. I recommend them both. I think they're both still working in the field. I learned more about media broadcasting a little bit. I fixed an iTunes podcast RSS views feed bug. Les sort of helped me figure out what the issue was, and I helped put the patch together to get it approved, because iTunes won't pick up on your podcast unless the length field is available, and the length is the bytes of the enclosure of the file. So that was a little detail, and again, it was always interesting to me, how do we improve these publishing tools? How do we build our independent media distribution networks? And this little modest feed plugin is the key to plugging into the iTunes galaxy, and I think that's so powerful in terms of that Drupal can do that kind of stuff. So in the course of that, I was working on this real sprawling D6 site, had 15 user roles, and I got stuck for a couple weeks. I couldn't figure out how to make the permissions grant in Drupal 6 fit together. I had mono that summer, so I was all screwed up and full of migraines and stuff. And then without really much warning or awareness, they're okay, sorry, you can't work here. And I was okay, I was surprised, right? I was man, I didn't see that coming. And so in retrospect, I feel I didn't communicate clearly enough and I didn't, and so it's good to know that if you do get stuck, you're if you're not communicating well, your job can be in more risk than you sort of think. And again, much as with the agriculture site, the next guy that they brought in was not any better than I was at figuring the thing out. So it was a situation where it's you got to really try to communicate to your superiors and make sure they kind of understand where you're coming from. So that that was a surprise. So and then after this, I worked with Minnesota Normal, which is a drug policy reform organization. They try to legalize cannabis, dial down the super racist war on drugs, which I always really cared about a lot. So my friend was their spokesman, and he also cared about free software and data requests and stuff like that, FOIAs. And so we developed this vision for a site that would have a legislator tracker, applying what I had learned earlier from politics in Minnesota, repositories for freedom of information, data, stuff like that, news, links, potentially local group facilitation. So I was really happy with this like political profile thing I built. I'll just mention, does anybody know GeoJSON as the format? Geographic JSON data, yeah? Yeah, so I got the polygons for the legislative districts and created, a nice what is this politician into? What are the sub-levels of their positions? What is their postal address, contact info, political party, all that stuff. And that was, I thought, that was helpful because you have thousands of people that don't know anything about legislative districts, don't know anything. And that really, if you surface this, you can direct dozens of people to start hammering. And I think that's important. It's Drupal doing that, or Drupal enabling that, I should say. So I think that we have the capability to do stuff like this, and I think we should keep on trying to do it. So GeoJSON did that stuff, feeds and CSV files. I'm still a huge fan. I've been trying to help the D8 feeds situation evolve. It's actually really good now. It became good in April. Site was pretty successful. Questionnaires, influenced the election of the 501c4, and sort of encouraged people to get engaged. The lessons here is that the site had a lot of content types. It was hard for the staff to learn. Once they learned it, they liked it, but it was hard for them to learn. The org had problems, they had turnover, so new staff wouldn't know what the old staff knew about running the website. I should have made a screencast when I did my trainings, right? If I sat down with an hour, I should have recorded what I was doing so the next people could learn it, and I didn't do that. And so I think that caused the website to get replaced with a much simpler one, sooner than it would have otherwise. So I do know that a current candidate for governor in Minnesota did get heavily influenced by this site. They were really agitated that we had pinned down their bad behavior at that point. And so it proves to me that yes, you can have that impact. You can pressure these people in the system. People that the regular public doesn't know about the system or who's there or whatever, but you can connect that, you can make that better. Another interesting one, a friend of mine in Spain reached out, and these guys were in Barcelona, Catalonia area. We're building something called Integral Community Exchange System, which is an alternate currency, kind of a time banking type of structure for these collectives in Catalonia. And so this Drupal module they were building could create these time credits that could go between different communes. And Wi-Fi, no. And so they were able to trade with each other without using euros or fractional banking currency. It was linked with the Cooperativa Integral Catalana project, started in 2011. It was still getting patches as late as recently as last March, so it's still happening. And my work was in 2013, 2015. It was not a huge amount of work, but I think it made a big difference. I helped rewrite the code so it would be accepted as a Drupal module under the standards that we had at the time. And wrote a lot of documentation, translated Spanish to English. I thought it was fascinating to have time-based currencies, and because we had open GPL license, that pressured the other CES members of the community, kind of pulled them towards having a free license themselves. So even just by doing this project, we affected how other people were licensing their projects. And I could see on the mailing list that these other collectives were importing their records into this system. And so I think it's to actually use Drupal to make a community currency. And unlike Bitcoin, which takes a lot of wattage, this is basically one server being backed up and some pages being accessed. So you don't need to consume a ton of energy to make alternative currencies. So we should keep an eye on this, that free software, Catalonia and Barcelona are all about this right now. And it's really interesting. And I wish I knew even a little more about it, but it provides an alternative to the boom and bust startup company, monopoly, exit strategy ecosystem that really doesn't work that well for most people. And so I think it's fascinating, and this was a level that let all these organizations kind of communicate with each other and trade value with each other. So I worked with an art collective called the Beehive Design Collective, and they've got pretty strong cred in activist world. They create these super intricate, huge pieces of art that you'll see if you ever go to a big protest like a G20, you'll see something like this. And so they had an old website. They wanted to do a Kickstarter to do this Mesoamerica Resiste project launch. And so they wanted to do a Kickstarter right before the end of the year, tax year, all that. I used WordPress, I used the Bones theme, I tweaked some custom fonts and Glyph app. Custom fonts that you make yourselves are very cool. I learned that designers are very exacting people, you know. And I was like, okay, I think the site's ready, guys. And they're like, no, these pixels are 5 off, come on, nudge, you know. And it's like, you just have to expect that with designers. They're not gonna like tolerate any rough edges. I sensed that the hosting was a little too slow, and so I insisted on setting up Cloudflare, because I knew that if this thing started going viral, it was gonna slow down. And that did save the day, because it went on Upworthy, and it did go viral and raised way more money than they were aiming for. And the Cloudflare did save the day, so I felt really good about that. So the website is still up. They're having a little maintenance trouble, and that's the thing with these, with any of these sites, WordPress or Drupal, is that even when they're working right, like it's still hard for lay people to keep them working, and that is a big problem we face, and that is a problem they have right now. The University of Minnesota, it was very interesting. I got to meet Dries and a bunch of other people in the Drupal world, because they did all these studies at the University of Minnesota Usability Lab, and this group of evangelists in the library pushed Drupal out to the whole University of Minnesota, and they got it going everywhere. And then later, when I was working at the University of Minnesota Foundation in 2014, I was doing a ticketing system thing that didn't involve Drupal much, but people upstairs were like, okay, he knows Drupal, like this site isn't saving values, like we gotta show these people this in a little bit, it's not working. And I was like, okay, that form looks weird. Like it was like a UI widget, right? It was changing a form element, you know? It was like a taxonomy selector, one of those type of things. And so I spotted that, and I was like, okay, disable that module, the field will act normal again, and it did. So it pays to be observant when you come into a situation where Drupal's around, and you know how it's supposed to look. And if you spot something like that you can tell some weird module is running, and that's screwing something up, and that was right. And I helped write the job description, because I was moving out to Boston. Julia was going to film school, so I was leaving Minneapolis, and I helped write a job description for the foundations in the hopes that they would get good Drupal staffing going on themselves. So now I'm in Boston, 2014. I started helping out with site building. The first person I worked with was Charles Bent, CQ Bent. I totally recommend him. He's a really good guy. We got really snowed in the epic winter of 2014-15. The whole town kind of shut down, so it wasn't easy to find work at that time. I worked on Boston healthcare for the homeless. I helped do some kind of theming and content types. I learned how to do HTML5 background videos. So I was trying to work my way around. And then in May of 2015, I got hired at Core Group, which is where James and I work. I'm full staff, James is front end officially. Ann made it, and Michelle made it. It's great. So we got a good team spirit here tonight, which is great. So it's a branding agency, helps develop new brands and campaigns for organizations, things like higher ed, construction, medical, that kind of thing. Through a recruiting agency, I got an interview. Their guy Joey O'Driscoll was leaving for Baltimore right away, and then he later hosted us at DrupalCon Baltimore. The Beehive site impressed them. They're like, all right, this is good. And so we estimate that new sites is kind of making most of the work, and about 35% of it is extending older sites. So it's a lot of WordPress, a lot of Drupal stuff, a lot of work in Boston University. I just want to share, this is our local server, the Ion server. Costs like $600. Because of my lesson with the Farmer magazine about development environments, I always wanted to have a good, solid development environment. It's very important. I don't want to work with weird multi-sites or clouds or whatever. So this runs Ubuntu and a hypervisor called Proxmox that people don't know too much about. It's a German product. It's very stable. It's got it costs like €5 a year or something for the basic license. So we run VMs that run CentOS, and then those are very similar to the kind of runtime of a production website environment. So and CentOS is similar to how I learned initially on BlueHost. I do like to kind of follow just a regular manual setup script. I don't like to spin up containers with their auto scripts. I just like to do it from scratch for a little while, so I don't feel like I'm forgetting the elements that go into the website. I like to know it kind of down the bottom as a full stack developer, which continues what I learned in high school, from my Apache for Dummies book. So the first D8 site that needed real theming was for Bridgewater State University, which already had Drupal 7 sites. So they had to kind of adjust their internal process. I had to learn how to do stuff with Octave Cloud. I found it difficult to determine at that time, like when you're editing twigs, what values are available, right? I think we can all probably relate to this if you're doing theming. You're like, where is the URL value of the field? Is that here? You know, stuff like that. So the trick to that, one of the tricks is that you can loop through the context and keys in Twig, and you can see what all the variables you have that are available inside each Twig. And to me, that was one of the most toughest Drupal 8 learning curves. If anybody else wants to chime in on that, I'd welcome more feedback. But that definitely, it was a learning curve to try to figure that out. So a little later, we built this website for this group called Berkeley Group, and there is Ann and I had some good times with all of this stuff. And so it's interesting, these guys are above the Macy's in downtown Crossing, and they have the whole internet exchange. So all the internet pipelines from France and Japan and everywhere come into this building, and they get crossed over these wires that they showed us. And it's like, that's the real internet. And Comcast is just one little panel among all these other internets, and yet they still have us under control. And it was just fascinating, because it's like, if you can get a line into this panel at this place, like the Free Software Foundation has a line like that, then you have your own ISP. And so that got me thinking about the actual, like, to be inside the physical architecture of the internet itself was fascinating. So I kind of helped, you know, translate this funny technical realm to the writers and the folks that I was working with, try to help them understand, come up with a way to sort of structure this. And I was happy that after we launched it, they were able to add a cloud supercomputing section to the website without even coming back to us. And that made me feel good, because I was like, oh great, we structured the website right. And then, like, they didn't have to pick it to pieces. And so that was, it was an interesting experience on a few levels. Oh yeah, one other thing which was interesting was I couldn't figure out how to do cookies with PHP in a reliable way because of caching. I bet somebody here does know how to do it. But we used JavaScript because we wanted to have it so that if you went into connectivity, like there would be some services that might be under cloud and connectivity. We wanted the menu to say connectivity if you come in on connectivity, or cloud if you come in on cloud. And you can do that by setting cookies with JavaScript. By saying, oh, you hit this path, the cookie has this value, and that worked reliably in JavaScript. So there is a way to do that. And I guess one other interesting thing was just that, like, I had to kind of manually generate the markup for the menus, and that was a little tricky. Like, it's a little hard to figure out what are the right statements to, like, manually generate a menu. And so that was kind of an interesting process. And so I got to know a lot more about pre-process functions in that process. So it was pretty successful. They were able to add that stuff. Oh yeah, the other thing I wanted to share with everybody is that I found that, like, so if you're making stuff in views, you can make a view as a block or a page. And I thought views pages were logical. I've used them before. But it's sort of hard to theme views pages. The documentation isn't that good. And so I would suggest that people use views blocks, and then either place the blocks or use a module like TwigTweak to pop the blocks in. And because it's hard to get the views alter hooks to work right, sort of. It's a very, very frustrating thing in this project. And so in the next one we did, we avoided that problem, and it was much better. So.
Can I ask why you were trying to do that?
Oh yeah, just because, like, you know, anytime you want to pre-process something, like
Oh,
you
sorry,
know.
the ones before.
Oh yeah. Listen.
Yes.
Why the views block thing?
Like, why were you trying to display the original? Basically, like, pages, like, thing.
Oh yeah, okay, right. I think it was because we were trying to make it more thematic, right? Like, because it's like, if you're trying to sell people on cloud services, you want them to see the cloud menu up on the upper left, right? Because like, these are all the other parts of cloud. And then, you know, so if you're trying to sell them connectivity, which is like having a pipeline to like Des Moines, Iowa, or whatever, that's a different set of services, so you want the menu to promote that set of services.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit of a marketing psychology thing, and I was like, whoa, that's a curveball. But yeah, JavaScript cookies, it worked. So that was good. Yes, okay. So, yeah, views pages, like I said, views blocks was easier. So we had to import from WordPress to Drupal. These guys were like, no, we can't have WordPress. We don't want WordPress. I was like, okay, well, let's do Drupal then. And so I feel that the WordPress migrate module is like strategically important to the Drupal community. And so when I was working on it, I had to apply these patches, and I was like, oh man, I should be a co-maintainer on this. So after the project was done, I got made a co-maintainer. I got the patches on the module. Now it works. I mean, it doesn't do some edge cases right, but it is, basically working. And that's really important, right? I think it's really important for people to be able to turn their websites from WordPress sites to Drupal sites. And I just think that, like, it seems like we don't think of certain modules as being strategic or super important, but I think this is totally one of them. I think it's like opening the water channels of the internet, letting the water like flow through. That's sort of how I think of it. So I think it's more WordPress migrate. So I worked on ZURB Foundation like a lot. I've used it for quite a few years. Kevin Quillen around town, and I think Samuel Mortensen's around town. They also did a ton of work for me. So I try to help answer questions, make some commits, like Bootstrap, it's a front-end kit, right? It's designed to give you grids and mobiles and off-canvas menus. It has like a lot of cool JavaScript, so you can tell what breakpoint you're on and stuff like that. And so, so the question for the community here is like, it's hard to decide what you should do with a theme and maintaining a theme, because you don't want to screw up people's existing websites. And so I think for the future, we want to make ZURB kind of stamp out or create new theme files, like use something like Gulp or whatever to make a new set of theme files. Because having dependencies, like the way Drupal's traditionally worked is that you have a parent theme and a child theme, but people change the child theme. And you don't know when you're maintaining the parent theme how people have changed the child themes. And so that's made it hard to decide certain things about what you should do as their foundation in terms of maintaining it. So it's an interesting puzzle, and I don't think it's quite the same as the challenge that module maintainers have. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, like think about it, like how can we make it the best way to maintain themes? It is very challenging. Okay, so Boston University School of Public Health, I built this new chart book for them. It runs on a framework called Symphony, which is like part of the underlying basis of Drupal 8. I got to learn controllers, namespacing, something called Doctrine ORM, which is like models objects from the database. I like making the controllers. I struggled with the dependency injection. I hated doing it, but I had to like copy and paste functions because I couldn't get them to like load from somewhere else. It was super frustrating. So I think that if I had started more from an ORM first kind of strategy the whole thing would have gone more smoothly, and I probably would have had an easier time making the administrative interface. But it turned out very stable, very reliable, mobile compatible. It meets their needs. They can edit it right. So it has been successful. But I think ORM is like the art of like defining how your objects exist in the database, which is something we usually sidestep with Drupal. So anyway, I thought that was something to think about. So yeah, BR+A, I mentioned it. It's like this comprehensive rebrand that we did. We used paragraphs a lot. We used Display Suite, ZURB Foundation, cool videos that were shot by a film team, and we did views as blocks. I made sure I was like, keep these as basic pages, wire in blocks using the block layouts, and like in terms of things like the pre-processing, caching, which I'll get to in a second, that was way more reliable than making views pages that are hard to control and theme. So that was important, and it helped us a lot. So this is a BR+A. It's got a cool video on it now. Anyway, so displays. I just want to mention a funny thing about Display Suite that I learned in this process. So Display Suite is a thing that has been around for quite a long time in Drupal, and it lets you switch layouts. So you have different, formerly PHP, now twig files. You can pick different twig files to run. But what I learned is that if you control which layout a paragraph has using Display Suite, the paragraph's pre-process hook doesn't even run. Only the Display Suite hook runs. And so you can't use paragraph pre-process to pre-process any paragraphs if you're using Display Suite. And that's not immediately obvious when you get into it. But if you look for twig debug codes for theme hooks, you'll notice it, but you might not realize what it means. So another tricky thing about it, I have a typo, it should be better exposed filters. I know that the administrator or the maintainer of that module, he passed away, I think in Seattle. And so it took a while, but other people really stepped up and they wrote like a bunch of patches. And so it just kind of started moving again in the last few months. And better exposed filters is really good because we lack certain options to control exposed filters. And folks don't know what exposed filters are. That's like when you create a view and you want to have an interactive thing, like I want to filter all of the nodes that have this taxonomy tag on a drop-down and this one on a drop-down, stuff like that. Better exposed filters is really good. So I had to kind of pick it apart, do a little custom stuff with it. So it was kind of stuck development-wise, but it is moving again. I recommend using it. The weirdest bug we ran into was we were trying to use Ajax contact forms, which is like somebody writes a contact form, they hit submit, and just like, part of the web page is submitted, and it says you submitted your message. And those would work after we cleared the cache, but then depending on how you moved around the site, they would stop working. They wouldn't submit as Ajax. And the problem was, like, I don't know the exact root of the problem. Who here, how about, throw your hand up if you work with cache tags in Drupal 8 at this point. We got some cache tag folks. Yes. Okay. So cache tags are pretty complicated. Probably can be a whole subject. And the interesting thing is that, like, if you have a search block, right? It's like a search to say that will get processed as a block. And if you dump the pre-processed block function in your theme, you'll see that the block only gets pre-processed kind of erratically. So what that means is that what I noticed, it took me too long to notice this, is that the submit buttons, if you have one submit that's for the Ajax contact form, and one has a submit button for the search form, if your caching is messed up, they'll have the same ID. The IDs are always supposed to be unique. Ajax won't work unless the IDs are unique. So you can grab a script off Stack Overflow that will freak out at you on the console if it finds duplicate IDs, and then you will help pick apart this problem. And so the way to fix it is to use your cache pre-processed block in your theme. If you take it so that your search blocks and your contact form blocks, especially the search blocks, if you set it so that the cache tag is per URL, then it all works. And so what that means is that the block is pre-processed on every different URL. And then that means that if it's on the URL that does have the search form, it'll have a different ID and it won't collide with the Ajax form. So anyway, so just look for duplicate IDs on your submit buttons if your Ajaxes aren't working, and the way to fix it is cache tags that are per URL in your pre-processed block hooks. That was pretty hard to figure out and deduce, so I do hope that you can use cool Ajax tricks if you know that. So I'm sure someone here who's super sharp at this stuff would have more insight about how to like dive into the cache tag world, but that was what I figured out, and it worked, so I was hugely relieved. So I just want to throw a quick plug for Headroom.js module. Headroom is a little thing that can change classes depending on how the screen is moving up and down. So like when you have those menus across the top of a site and they kind of shrink, when you're going down and then they expand and you go up, or they disappear. Headroom.js is a great JavaScript library for that, and it's got a nice wrapper module, and I try to work on polishing it so that it'll give you good status messages if your JavaScript are missing. So I think it's a great module, a simple module to look at for how to do a wrapper module. So I just want to mention that it's becoming a little more popular. I was answering a couple questions on the Drupal module upgrader issue queues, and WebCheck was like, "Oh, you're interested in this? You can be a co-maintainer." I was like, "Oh wow, that's a big responsibility." So Drupal module upgrader is very interesting. It was developed a few years ago to take Drupal 7 code, attempt to turn it into Drupal 8 code like automatically, and so nobody has really been doing any maintenance on it.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. It's hard. But the thing about it is that it's hard to understand a little, like in terms of my level of understanding. just Farberist and all this stuff, and the hooks that are going on. For the most part it works well, but it's got a few little snaggy things piled up. But it's hard for me to understand how to dramatically improve it. But I think I deduced how to fix some issues on it. So I put a commit on there, and then I tagged a release, and so now it's got 8.x 1.3 as of a little earlier this week. So that's good. First one since 2015. So you can experiment with turning Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 modules, and take a look at the issue queue, and maybe some people can help me figure out the more advanced trickiness that's involved to really improving it. I wanted to throw in also a quick plug for the kind of the indie web ideas, which are like trying to get away from the silos of social corporate media and stuff. So I went to an IndieWebCamp, and Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web, came by and stole a burrito from the group. So that was the burrito incident. And so I helped get WebMention going into this thing called Vinculum module, and then we later, for Drupal 8, renamed it Linkback, and a couple guys who are really smart people, like, really refined that as a batch API. It's like, if you look at the way it's structured, it's really cool. And then similarly, there's a new IndieWeb module that is like hitting a bunch of different IndieWeb technologies, and that's really like evolved in like the last few months. So there's Linkback that's got some cool batching stuff. IndieWeb has all kinds of like crazy tools built in, so I'm hoping that stuff takes off. And then you can look up IndieWebCamp if you're interested in this little world of interoperable software that people write plugins for all kinds of platforms. So honorable mentions, James Lau, my reflective and reliable partner in crime every step of the way. Also, if you're doing WordPress, James found this Timber theme which does Twig and WordPress, and it's actually pretty nice. I used Bones theme earlier, which I also thought was good, but plug for Timber. So I had an interesting career so far. I did a lot of Drupal stuff, journalism, nonprofits, media, advocacy, higher ed, branding, some interesting various side tracks. I found that avoiding certain pitfalls, like caching bugs, puzzling theming situations, that's really the key to like moving your projects along smoothly. So I feel like I've had a really long-term commitment to the Drupal community, not always a high level of activity, but usually pretty thorough. I've been very committed to documentation. If you notice on Drupal user profiles, it says more than 100 edits. You hit that number pretty quick. It's like, hey, I got a lot more than 100 edits. But I think that's really good. Whenever I find something confusing, I always try to edit the documentation, and then I come back to it 18 months later to the same page. I've done that many, many times. Try to help out in issue queues. It always reflected my interest in kind of like the Lego style of building websites and stuff. So I feel confident Drupal can meet a lot of challenges and not become more distant from the rest of the techie world out there. I think that the earlier examples, Headroom.js and ZURB Foundation, those are good third-party things that we bring into Drupal, and I think we can do that. We can really bring a lot of this third-party stuff forward. So, what new and interesting things can you do and make happen with Drupal? Thank you all. Thank you. So I know that was pretty scattershot, but I'd be happy to take some questions, or I would just hope to, if you guys want to have some discussion about stuff like themes or what are our caching tags, or all that kind of stuff. Does anybody have any questions or comments about this? Yes. Caching tags, as far as I understand it, are attributes that are put on objects, right? Like the thing about Drupal 8 is that it has this very advanced caching system. Someone who's a caching expert, is there any caching super experts in the house tonight? Okay. When things are generated, they have tags that are associated with them, such as to say like the case of the URL tags is to say this block gets generated and pre-processed once, but it's marked as only applying to this URL. It's tagged as a cache tag as a URL. Or it could be it's cache tagged to a user role. So it only generates when that user role sees the block, something like that. So cache tags are like properties that are associated with something when it's generated once that indicate if you need to invalidate what was cached and generate a new one under what conditions. And it's so new and it's so different than the way things normally work. We used to just have page caches. If you go back to Drupal 7 and stuff, there was just like page caches. If you're an anonymous visitor, you're at node 100, node 100 is cached as a page. That was kind of how it worked. And then a view could be cached because you could set rules about how the results of a view were saved instead of the whole view being calculated. So cache tags are this very sophisticated and granular thing in Drupal 8 that lets you hit much higher performance because so many of the things are made more efficient with caching. So it's a big advance in Drupal 8, but it's hard to understand and it's hard to know that that's the kind of problem you've run into. And so I try to highlight the ID mismatch thing because that's a clue of what that problem is. But dumping the pre-process functions in your theme, dumping them out using the twig dump function, that will help indicate to you if something is cached or not, because you'll see it being generated if it wasn't cached. But if you don't see the dump, then the pre-processing didn't run, so it is cached. So that's how you can kind of start to get your head around it. But there's good stuff in Stack Exchange, Stack Overflow about this. That was how I ultimately got to the bottom of this one. So it's a good question. Yes.
So, as you explained, over the course of your career so far, you've had a chance to contribute to core modules, kind of take over some maintenance or be a contributor to them. Or build things, how have you balanced knowing when you could take something on to like be a maintainer or have to decide maybe no, like you can't? Like, how have you balanced that yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can usually like a lot of times what I'll do different little things I look after in life, like I'll sort of say like, okay, I can at least throw in like a minor bit of effort here. Instead of saying I'm gonna like do everything to try to refactor this module, it just could be like, I'm gonna try to keep an eye on this issue queue and like field the easier questions that I do know. So I feel comfortable not being at like superstar maintainer level, but just like just sort of little nudges type level, and that can actually go pretty far because a lot of people will observe the things that you solved, even with that smaller bit of effort, and I feel like that's how I managed to not get overextended. And I go in waves too, like I'll kind of have sort of a monthly pattern or whatever. I'll sort of swing past everything, check it out. Like WordPress migrate, very slow issue queue, but I try to like hit it like, at least once a month. So lower level activity, sort of checking on things, try to get the word out, maybe more people pick them up. So, yeah. Yes?
I was just going to ask you a follow-up question about how you manage the community development. And I think you just may have answered it at the end.
Yeah.
It's about how much time you spend on inviting and mentoring and getting new contributors.
Well, I haven't done too much direct mentoring, and I haven't done talks like this. So I'm trying to move, towards more than just writing up documentation and answering issues and commits here and there, because I don't want to give the impression that I'm like a superstar programmer. Like I've always struggled with all these, regular things. But the thing about it is that you can find ways around the edge of things, and I think that you can encourage people to look around for the edge of things, And I've tried to encourage friends that got into webcams and stuff. They weren't necessarily the most technical people, but I knew they were like pretty methodical. They had a certain kind of logical brain, and I was like, you know what, you guys can do this. And so I try to not be a technical mentor all the time, but sometimes a little bit of an emotional support mentor, I guess. Just be like, you can make it there. And like one person I know who wasn't particularly technical is now like kind of becoming a sort of a security superstar. It's pretty cool. I'm like, wow, But and then I think they appreciated that, like when they started getting into it, I was like, yes, you can do this. And then like it did boost their spirits when they were in the stress of trying to get their footing on it. Let's see what else. So I'm hoping I'm hoping to see ways that people can feel that they don't have to be the superstar to get a tangible advance in the process of helping support people, helping kind of find new ways to, new little recipes to create sites and stuff. I feel like you don't have to be a superstar to do that stuff. And to be a module maintainer, you don't have to like be as smart as some of these amazing module writers. You just have to like have enough of an understanding to get one person a few steps farther, and that still counts too. That's also co-maintaining, and you can do that. So I feel like if people have confidence they can do that, it can go very far actually. I think that a lot of communities really ride more on that level than people realize. We think of it as just superstars, but I don't think it is. I really don't. So anybody else? Anybody else? Yes, yes.
You mentioned a little bit about like looping through like Twig templates and dumping. Have you come across the Twig XDebug module before?
Twig XD?
XDebug? Yeah.
Oh,
I think
XDebug.
everybody wrote it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we could. Okay, so XDebug is interesting. It's actually been around for quite a few years, and I'd say in the last couple of years I've gotten a little better handle. It can be a little finicky. XDebug sort of will call back to your integrated development environment of like what the state is of like. It's a way of kind of stopping PHP at a certain point, and it'll tell you what the values of different variables are. So when you really get into some more sophisticated development, then you need something like XDebug to really grab variables and not just write it on dump statements and stuff like that. And I definitely, that's definitely the way to go. The tip I learned about XDebug, probably from I think somebody here, is that Twig will generate little temporary PHP files. They live in your site's default files type area. Usually it's like site default files PHP. And so the thing is, you can't set breakpoints on Twig files. So if you have PHP Storm, Eclipse, what other IDEs people like to use right now? You want to mention?
Vim.
Vim. Ooh, XDebug on Vim. That's a new one. They give you a free pair of suspenders if you give a talk on that. But yeah, so the thing of it was that if you so I know that the trick to getting XDebug to work with Twig, you have to first on an IDE, you pull down all of those temporary files into your development environment, which you normally wouldn't really do. And then if you put breakpoints on those PHP files that get generated, and you can, because they have like names that sort of reveal what they're from, kind of. They have like sort of like view, name of the view, and then a bunch of gibberish, and then you can tell that's the right temporary PHP file. You stick a breakpoint on there, that will get hit if you're in the right spot, and then you will get all your variables. So you can't use XDebug on Twigs, but you can use them on those generated cache files, generated PHP cache files.
But there is a module, Twig XDebug.
Twig XDebug.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you guys wrote it.
You're not right. It works out.
It stops you from having to do that because you actually
Okay.
write there.
So it's
As long
called
as your IDE supports XDebug.
It still hops you out of the Twig file though. You still can
Yeah.
like you're just investigating the context and things, but it's helpful.
Yeah, I didn't hear about that one, so I'll just repeat it for the camera. Is that it was Twig XDebug module. Nice, that's really cool. I did use Twig tweaks. If people use Twig tweak or Twig tweaks. If people use that one or you know that one, it basically it gives you a lot of like little shorthand Twig statements for like things like the value of fields, so that you don't have to like dig way down into a really complicated object or whatever. So Twig tweaks, take a look at the cheat sheet that's associated with Twig tweaks. I really, that one can definitely save you some time. Because I think that like, if you want to improve the development experience, you gotta like make it easier for people to find Twig stuff. One thing I wanted to mention was, does anybody remember Devel Themer from back in the day, before Drupal 8? Devel Themer was pretty freaking sweet. So if you don't know, Devel Themer was this little thing that would make like a little sort of JavaScript modal pop-up thing. And then you could click on like fields or parts of views and stuff, and it would tell you what themed that part of the page. It would tell you what other PHP files you could name that could take over, candidates, template candidates for that part of the page. So we had Devel Themer in Drupal 7, and that was super helpful. And we don't quite have anything like that. Like I would like it if there is something with Drupal 8 that like can tell you, like, if you click on it, this is like what the name of the Twig value is right here. I haven't seen that yet, and I think maybe that'll be.
You can turn on debugging for Twig, and then it inserts HTML comments with all of that information. And you just open up the page in your browser tools,
Yeah. That's,
and you can see what templates you can use to override it, what template's active. Pretty much exactly what Delphina
Yeah.
gave you.
That's okay. So he pointed out that so if you go to the services.yaml file, there's a toggle to turn on the twig debugging, which sometimes plays a little havoc with Ajax. Like if you're trying to work in Ajax, it'll get messed up. So just know that going in. But I found that didn't give me candidates for form elements. Like I couldn't override like the formation of a checkbox, right? Because you want to make less ugly checkboxes, right? And then the debug thing won't tell you like these are some other names you could have for checkboxes. So actually that was a thing too that adjusting the candidate names for templates and making more candidate names for templates is something that's really helpful. Like you can I think I threw it in a ZURB Foundation issue thread just so I would have it set aside. But you can make it so that like so you can pick twigs that are different based on the display mode, right? So in Drupal, different display modes are like nodes that are being used in different contexts. So they might be showing a different set of fields, they might be appearing in a different place, but it doesn't really make it easy by default to make a twig for a different display mode. So there is a way to do that, and I've been doing it pretty regularly on the theme level. It's not in ZURB, but I think I threw it on an issue queue because I wanted to make it so that I could customize, like for example, on the website we have locations, right, that are little paragraphs, right? And they appear in the footer, so they have one kind of markup in the footer, and one kind of set of fields. And then they appear on the contact page with a few more fields on them, like the map link or whatever. And so you need to be able to have a way to pick between those two display modes and pick your twigs. And so you have to like override the theme a little bit to like pick different display modes for your twigs. That's not something that's built in. And so that's the type of thing where I think if Drupal improves, it makes it easier to create new twigs, to identify what they should be in cases where you can't get something like a different display mode twig. Those type of things would just make it so much easier. And that's something that isn't really obvious when you're just jumping in. You don't realize that type of option is missing, but that type of thing is something that's been very valuable that in the last couple of years I've sort of piled up as like a trick. Because otherwise you don't have the flexibility to do your theming. So, yes.
So you mentioned communication as several of your lessons learned.
Yes.
Do you have a succinct way of describing your new communication style now that you've had a chance to absorb those lessons?
That's a very good question.
It's a wrap-up question.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good time to wrap it up. It's very different if you're solo, right? It really depends on the context of your like working environment, right? Because if you're a solo person, you'll usually tend to be with a small organization. If you're working in like a design team, you may or may not really have a full project manager. You may have kind of a partial kind of project manager, someone that kind of acts as a sort of a foil for the silly requests that the client sends sometimes. And so, but if you're solo, I think it's about pacing. I think that if you set an expectation that you're going to check in every 2 weeks or something, then you have like kind of a wave to sort of build in your behavior. So I think that's kind of what I've done a lot of the time. It's something long term, and if I'm by myself, I try to like create kind of a wave pattern that like adds some predictability to it and doesn't just sort of random. I can be a pretty random person, and so I think that's a good tactic. For working in teams, I've found now that GitLab, especially now with the GitHub news over the weekend, like GitLab is getting a new attention, and I tell you, it's really good software. It updates itself really easily, and it's like very sophisticated, and they update it like 3 times a week, and it's like that's really good for communicating in the development teams. So that helps a lot. And then sometimes this is things like Basecamp, and just like trying to nail, having milestones. Like when I was solo, I didn't really have a systematic approach to creating milestones, and I think that opens up that type of problem more. So I think all of those things, all those elements combined, kind of create a better pacing, and then make you feel like you're not kind of stuck, like you're not sort of avoiding holding your cards. If you can stay out of that posture, then you won't run into those problems so bad. Yes, Anna.
I would like to say as a business owner and someone that works with me on a daily basis, what are the best
So I'll just say for the benefit of the microphone, that yeah, Anne's talking about daily meetings when timelines are tight, that kind of thing, and it's true because it's like the meetings can help you avoid losing the forest for the trees, right? Because you can be really annoyed that like some little bit of markup is not really coming out quite the way you want it, even though it's. And so from a position of feeling like this needs to be proper, that you want to like dive in on some really narrow thing, and then that can kind of easily happen. Like you end up on the wrong level of abstraction. Like in our business, we're dealing with all these different levels of abstraction, and so the folks that aren't technical are way out on the outside of those levels, and so they can kind of help bring you out when you're going way in too deep sometimes. So that's my tip there. All right. Anything else? I think that's it. All right. Thanks so much, guys.